Friends, fellow Americans, something just happened in New York City that nobody in Washington was prepared for. A local election, a few thousand votes, a result that barely made the evening news, and yet behind that small moment lies something enormous. Because what Zohran Mamdani just said after that vote wasn't a concession, it was a revelation. He finally pulled back the curtain on the plan his movement has been quietly building for months, and within hours, Donald Trump fired back with a response that left even seasoned Democrats frozen. Now, if you've followed Mamdani's rise, you know the story they've been selling: a young progressive reformer fighting for working people, challenging corporate greed, pushing for a new American vision. But this time, he didn't sound like a reformer. He sounded like a strategist unveiling a long-term operation, one that reaches far beyond New York politics. Because in his victory night remarks, between the applause lines, he outlined a structure for consolidating local and national power that could rewrite how the Democratic Party functions from the inside out. He called it the ground network. To most listeners, it sounded like another grassroots slogan. But to political analysts, it rang alarm bells. What he described was a parallel infrastructure, independent funding hubs, data centers, and candidate pipelines, designed to bypass the Democratic establishment entirely. In plain terms, Mamdani is no longer asking for influence within the system, he's preparing to replace it. And that, more than anything, explains why Trump's counterattack came so fast and hit so hard. Within hours, Trump took the stage in Florida and did what he does best: turned an insider strategy into a national scandal. He called Mamdani's network the blueprint for a one-party state, accused Democrats of rigging democracy under the banner of reform, and, here's the part that stunned everyone, claimed to have intelligence from inside their own operation. Whether that's true or pure theater almost doesn't matter, because the effect was immediate. Cable networks cut into their regular programming. Progressive leaders scrambled to clarify. Schumer's office went dark for 24 hours. And for the first time, Mamdani's movement wasn't the one defining the narrative, it was defending itself. Behind the cameras, panic rippled through Democratic circles. Advisors who once hailed Mamdani as the future of the party were suddenly asking how much of his ground network overlapped with official campaign infrastructure. Staffers were ordered to check email servers, review donation channels, and prepare statements in case of disclosure. No one would say disclosure of what. Meanwhile, in Republican war rooms, Trump's team smelled blood. They knew the real battle wasn't over votes, it was over perception. If they could convince Americans that the progressive wing was building a covert power apparatus while claiming moral purity, they could fracture the Democrats from within. So they flooded social media with clips of Mamdani's speech, cut to dramatic music, captioned with words like control, plan, and replacement. Overnight, what was supposed to be a local political rally became a national flashpoint. And here's what makes this moment so explosive: both sides are technically telling the truth. Mamdani is building an independent network, and Trump is exploiting it masterfully. It's not conspiracy, it's choreography. Two movements feeding off each other's momentum, each claiming to fight corruption while quietly thriving on the chaos it creates. In New York, reporters who've covered Mamdani for years say they've never seen him this defiant. His next-day press conference wasn't damage control, it was escalation. He said, if they're scared, good. Power should never feel safe. That line was meant for his base, but it landed across the country like a shot fired at the heart of the Democratic establishment. You could almost hear the phones ringing in Washington as senior officials tried to decide whether to embrace him or isolate him. And in that confusion, Trump's team moved again. They released a statement claiming that several major donors connected to Mamdani's initiative had ties to what they called foreign-influenced policy groups. No evidence, no names, just enough insinuation to dominate another 24-hour news cycle. By the time fact-checkers began to untangle it, the damage was done. The idea had taken root that Mamdani wasn't just a rebel within the party, he was a risk to national security. This is how modern politics works now: one side exposes, the other reframes, the public drowns in noise, and somewhere beneath that noise, real power shifts. What's happening tonight isn't a story about two men trading insults. It's the collision of two movements that represent opposite visions of the American future, one building structures from the ground up, the other dismantling institutions from the top down. But here's the truth no one on television will say: both need each other. Mamdani's insurgency gives Trump's rhetoric its villain. Trump's counterattack gives Mamdani's movement its martyrdom. Together, they're fueling the most dangerous dynamic in politics, polarization that feels righteous on both sides. So as New York celebrates and Washington panics, the question becomes this: is Mamdani's ground network a genuine revolution, or the beginning of another illusion, a new face for the same old machinery of control? And is Trump's fury the sign of strength, or the signal that he's finally found a rival bold enough to mirror his own playbook? Stay with me, because what's coming next will show whether Mamdani's revelation was a declaration of independence, or the opening move in a political war that could change the balance of power in America forever. If you listen closely to Mamdani's speech, past the applause, past the slogans, what you hear isn't a politician improvising. It's an engineer unveiling a design. A design for how power could operate outside the reach of Washington's traditional structures, immune to donor influence, media spin, and even party discipline. And that's why his plan has sent such a chill through the Democratic establishment. For decades, the party's energy has flowed downward, from think tanks to campaigns, from major donors to grassroots volunteers. What Mamdani has built reverses that direction entirely. His ground network pushes influence upward. It starts at the street level, with hyperlocal organizations, housing collectives, mutual aid funds, small business councils, all interconnected through a shared data infrastructure. Each cell is autonomous but feeds information into a central node that analyzes voter sentiment, community needs, and funding efficiency. It's political decentralization powered by algorithmic precision. In practical terms, Mamdani is creating what some political analysts are already calling the parallel party. It doesn't compete with Democrats directly, at least not yet. It infiltrates the same space and slowly replaces it. Candidates begin running under the same banners, using the same colors, speaking the same language of reform. But behind the scenes, their campaigns are funded, trained, and managed by ground network operatives who owe their loyalty not to the party, but to the system Mamdani designed. That's why Schumer's office panicked after Trump's revelation. The senator's grip on local political funding, the lifeblood of Democratic control in New York, depends on loyalty networks. And suddenly, Mamdani's organization is siphoning that loyalty away, offering infrastructure without compromise. Campaign managers are defecting. Volunteers are leaving state-backed operations to work for ground affiliates. The establishment's authority, long sustained by inertia, is being eroded by a movement that promises to make every voter feel indispensable again. But beneath the language of empowerment, there's something darker, something that explains why Trump's response was so swift and so furious. The ground network isn't just a campaign model. It's a data engine. Every local partner that joins feeds its database with voter preferences, financial transactions, behavioral analytics, and communications metadata. Mamdani's team insists it's all voluntary and transparent, but cybersecurity experts warn that it mirrors the same architecture used by major political intelligence firms, except this one operates outside federal oversight. To Trump's strategists, that's not just politics. That's warfare. In a leaked memo from Trump's digital operations team, one line stood out: if ground reaches critical mass by mid-2026, we lose the narrative advantage permanently. In plain English, that means control of the public conversation, the ability to set agendas, frame issues, and dominate the emotional tone of national discourse, would shift from centralized media ecosystems to Mamdani's decentralized digital communities. No mainstream network could match it. No campaign could ignore it. It's no wonder that Trump's response came loaded with both warning and spectacle. He knows that Mamdani's model doesn't require winning elections right away, it just needs to change how people think about representation. Once enough citizens start seeing themselves as part of a new, unfiltered, democratic structure, the old system becomes irrelevant, and with it, Trump's traditional populist advantage begins to fade. But this isn't just an ideological fight. It's economic. Hidden behind Mamdani's grassroots branding are powerful financial backers, hedge fund idealists, Silicon Valley disruptors, and nonprofit executives who see his network as the prototype for something much bigger: algorithmic democracy. A system where public sentiment is tracked, processed, and translated into policy recommendations by machine learning models, bypassing political negotiation entirely. To his supporters, that sounds revolutionary. To his critics, it sounds like control in its purest form: invisible, efficient, and irreversible. Meanwhile, inside the Democratic Party, fractures are widening. Younger strategists are quietly aligning with Mamdani, arguing that he represents the future of politics: direct, digital, and data-driven. The older guard, Schumer included, sees him as a threat to the delicate balance that keeps the party funded and functional. The result is paralysis. Half the party wants to integrate ground into its structure, the other half wants to destroy it before it grows too powerful. And then there's Trump, standing on the opposite side of the battlefield, doing what he's always done best: turning chaos into opportunity. His counterattack isn't just about exposing the data network or questioning its legality. It's about rebranding the entire operation as proof of democratic hypocrisy, the idea that the party of the people is secretly building a digital empire to control them. His speech is now focused less on policy and more on trust. He calls ground the new surveillance state, describes it as Silicon Valley socialism, and paints Mamdani as a puppet of global tech interests. Whether those accusations are true doesn't matter. What matters is how they feel, and Trump understands that better than anyone. Within days, the political narrative shifted entirely. The story was no longer about a reformer's innovation, it was about whether democracy itself was being hijacked by algorithms. Public opinion polls show a sharp divide. One half of the country sees Mamdani as a visionary, the other sees him as a threat. And through it all, the Democrats, trapped between their fear of Trump and their dependence on Mamdani's energy, are losing control of both the message and the movement. Meanwhile, analysts at major intelligence agencies are watching with growing concern. Their reports warn of non-state political infrastructures developing the capability to mobilize millions without centralized command. One section, later redacted, mentions behavioral pattern mapping exceeding state-level capacity. In plain English, Mamdani's network now knows more about American voter behavior than the federal government. It's a strange new world where ideology meets technology, and the balance of power no longer depends on institutions, but on whoever controls the data. Trump's team knows it. Schumer's allies fear it. And Mamdani, the man who once promised to restore democracy, may have just built the tool that could transform it beyond recognition. That's why, when Trump took the microphone and said, "You think they're organizing?" "No, they're calculating," the room fell silent. Because even his critics understood, this isn't politics as usual. It's evolution, and evolution doesn't wait for permission. Every major political earthquake begins the same way, not with a bang, but with disbelief. When Trump took that stage in Florida and began tearing into Mamdani's ground network, many Democrats brushed it off as another spectacle, another headline-grabbing performance. But by the next morning, the tone had changed. Because this time, the numbers told a story no one could spin. Overnight, donations to progressive candidates dropped by 30%. Engagement on Mamdani-affiliated social media accounts cratered. Meanwhile, Trump's approval among independents, voters who had drifted away since 2020, suddenly spiked. The backlash had begun, and it was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Trump didn't just expose Mamdani's plan, he reframed it. He turned a story of reform into a story of betrayal. He spoke directly to the millions of Americans who already felt manipulated by systems they didn't understand: digital platforms, party elites, experts making decisions in boardrooms instead of ballots. He told them, "They're not trying to represent you, they're trying to replace you." It was pure populist fire, and it worked because it didn't need to be factually airtight. It only needed to resonate emotionally. That's Trump's greatest skill, weaponizing suspicion. He doesn't invent distrust, he redirects it. By painting Mamdani's network as the ultimate symbol of elitist overreach, he reignited the emotional divide that has fueled his movement since 2016, the forgotten American versus the machine. And the brilliance, or danger, of this tactic is that he didn't need to prove anything. The idea of a hidden network controlling democracy was enough to make millions of people feel vindicated. Inside Democratic headquarters, panic turned into paralysis. Every response looked defensive. Every denial sounded like confirmation. Party strategists urged leaders to get ahead of the narrative, but there was no narrative left to get ahead of. Trump had already seized it. And when a story becomes his, it stops being a debate and starts being an identity. By the end of the week, Trump's team had rolled out an entire campaign around Mamdani's plan. They called it Operation Daylight. Its purpose? To expose hidden agendas in American politics. But the real goal was psychological, to make every voter feel like a whistleblower. Online ads invited people to report signs of ground infiltration in their communities. Forums flooded with screenshots, theories, half-truths, and fake maps allegedly showing how Mamdani's data network connected to Washington insiders. None of it was verifiable, but all of it was believable. And in politics, belief is the only currency that matters. The momentum was staggering. Conservative media treated Mamdani like the new face of corruption, a progressive villain tailor-made for their audience. Headlines read like movie trailers: The Shadow Network, How Mamdani Plans to Rewrite Democracy. Primetime hosts played clips of his speech on loop, slowing his words, dissecting his phrasing, showing graphics of digital webs wrapping around the Capitol. The symbolism was simple, terrifying, and effective. At first, Democrats tried to fight back with data, fact sheets, clarifications, interviews. But the more they explained, the more the public tuned out. In an age of emotion-driven politics, facts don't disarm fear, they feed it. Voters saw explanations as excuses and silence as guilt. By the time Schumer stepped in with a statement calling Trump's claims dangerous distortions, it was already too late. Behind the scenes, the mood in Washington was grim. Intelligence officials briefed Senate leaders on potential exploitation of political data ecosystems, language so vague it only deepened the mystery. Leaked fragments of those briefings, whether intentional or not, began circulating online. Phrases like unverified influence mapping and non-traditional information warfare spread across social media, blending fact and fiction into a new kind of political mythology. Trump didn't have to orchestrate the chaos, he just had to let it grow. And he did. He doubled down, posting nightly on his social platform, threading new claims into old conspiracies, linking Mamdani's movement to everything from election manipulation to media bias. It didn't matter that most of it was exaggerated or baseless. In the public's mind, Mamdani and Schumer had already become symbols of the same corrupt web. The Democratic response grew frantic. Mamdani tried to fight back directly, accusing Trump of fear-mongering and distorting the truth. But his words didn't land. The charisma that once made him look bold now made him look combative. Every time he defended himself, clips were edited to sound arrogant, dismissive, elitist. Trump's base laughed. Independents rolled their eyes. Even sympathetic journalists started questioning whether Mamdani's network was too ambitious to be transparent. Then came the polls. Within 2 weeks of Trump's speech, approval ratings for the Democratic leadership hit their lowest point since 2011. Swing states shifted. Voter confidence in electoral fairness dropped by nearly 20% across the board. And that's when something extraordinary happened. Moderate Democrats began to echo Trump's language. Quietly, almost subconsciously, they started calling for transparency in digital organizing, accountability in data use, and reforms to ensure fairness. They didn't mention Mamdani by name, but the signal was clear, even within his own party. the tide was turning. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign was moving faster than anyone could track. Fundraising skyrocketed. Rallies multiplied. His rhetoric shifted from outrage to inevitability. "We're not fighting for power," he told one crowd. "We're reclaiming it." That line, short, sharp, cinematic, summed up everything his supporters wanted to believe. And that's the real danger of Trump's genius. He doesn't need facts to win, he needs faith. His power isn't built on logic but on rhythm, the cadence of certainty in an age of confusion. When he speaks, he fills the vacuum left by institutions that no longer know how to sound confident. By the end of the month, the backlash had transformed into something larger, a full-blown movement, not of anger but of momentum. Trump was once again the center of gravity. Mamdani had become a cautionary tale. And Democrats, fractured between fear and denial, were left defending a system that half the country no longer trusted. It's ironic. Mamdani wanted to decentralize power. Trump just showed how easily it can be recaptured. And now, Washington faces a question it's never had to answer before. What happens when a populist and a revolutionary feed off each other's fire, and everyone else gets burned in the glow? By the time the dust began to settle after Trump's explosive counterattack, Washington no longer looked like itself. The Capitol had entered a new psychological phase, a kind of political vertigo where every headline, every leaked memo, every nervous statement carried the same undertone: no one is in control anymore. The Democrats were fractured, the progressives were demoralized, and even Trump's allies, flushed with momentum, sensed that something larger than politics was shifting beneath them. The ground rules had changed. Permanently. For years, America's two-party system functioned like a controlled rivalry, predictable, theatrical, self-sustaining. Each side needed the other to define itself. But after the Mamdani-Trump collision, that balance broke. Suddenly, neither party could claim moral authority. The Democrats, exposed as a machine more obsessed with control than reform, were bleeding credibility. The Republicans, galvanized by Trump's relentless populism, were morphing into something entirely new, less a political party, more a mass identity built around vengeance and belonging. And caught between these two collapsing empires stood millions of Americans wondering which version of the truth to believe, or whether truth even mattered anymore. Inside the Pentagon, analysts began using a term that hadn't appeared in intelligence reports in decades: ideological fragmentation. It describes what happens when competing narratives become so powerful that institutions lose the ability to unify a country's identity. It's not civil war, not yet. But it's the step before, the point where political loyalty becomes cultural loyalty becomes tribal, and governance becomes theater. And right now, the United States is living that theater in real time. After Trump's Operation Daylight campaign flooded the information space, the effects became measurable. Faith in electoral institutions hit record lows. Trust in the media collapsed across every demographic. Activist groups, left and right, started organizing outside traditional party frameworks, creating their own ecosystems of information, their own digital militias of narrative enforcement. It was no longer just about who held power in Washington. It was about who could define what power even meant. Mamdani's ground network, despite the backlash, didn't disappear. It evolved. Cut off from official democratic infrastructure, it went underground, metaphorically and literally. Its operatives stopped holding rallies and started holding private strategy sessions. Leaked documents revealed a shift in focus, away from electoral campaigns and toward community sovereignty initiatives, a euphemism for local autonomy projects that could eventually operate without federal oversight. The ground was no longer trying to win elections, it was trying to rewrite the concept of representation itself. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign transformed into something the Republican Party had never seen before: a hybrid of political operation and digital crusade. His rallies became ritualized, less about policy, more about identity affirmation. Each event felt like a national broadcast of defiance. His followers didn't attend for promises, they attended for purpose. They believed the system had betrayed them, and Trump's rhetoric gave that betrayal meaning. And here's where the danger lies. Both movements, Mamdani's decentralized network and Trump's populist engine, share one thing in common: they no longer see traditional democracy as the solution. To Mamdani's side, democracy has been corrupted by corporate money and procedural stagnation. To Trump's side, democracy has been hijacked by elites and cultural manipulation. Both are convinced that only a reset can restore America. The question now isn't which side is right, it's how far each is willing to go. As political scientists started tracking ground's activity, they noticed an alarming trend. In cities like Chicago, Austin, and Portland, local policy groups with ties to Mamdani's digital infrastructure began lobbying for parallel civic councils, grassroots assemblies that could recommend local ordinances outside traditional city frameworks. On paper, these were advisory groups. In practice, they were proto-governments, early prototypes of what could one day become a shadow state within the state. Trump's camp seized on this instantly. He called them the blueprint for controlled opposition, accusing Democrats of building their own replacement America. And though his phrasing was apocalyptic, the claim had traction because people could see it. The footage of activists debating policy and independent councils spread online, stripped of nuance, reframed as evidence of insurrection from the left. The irony, of course, is that Trump himself was waging his own version of the same revolution, one led not by councils, but by crowds. By 2026, the political map of the United States looked less like red versus blue and more like an archipelago of rival realities. Some states aligned with ground-style local governance, focusing on cooperative economics and decentralized media. Others aligned with Trump's populist resurgence, tightening control over elections, speech, and institutions. The federal government, trapped in the middle, had become a referee without authority. And through it all, the Pentagon watched. Not with partisanship, but with dread. Internal briefings warned that persistent ideological division could soon translate into structural destabilization. Translation: a nation too divided to govern itself. The generals called it a slow-motion fracture, not an explosion, but a shattering. At the human level, the consequences were everywhere. Families split not by party, but by information ecosystems. Children grew up in algorithmic realities completely detached from their parents. Truth had become a matter of subscription. People no longer debated facts, they debated sources. Political identity had turned into digital religion, each side evangelizing its truth, each side certain the other was brainwashed. Through it all, Schumer remained silent. His empire of influence, once the unshakable center of Democratic power, had been reduced to rubble by exposure and exhaustion. In interviews, his former aides described him as a man watching the house he built burn from the inside. He couldn't stop Trump's surge. He couldn't control Mamdani's rebellion. The middle ground, his territory, was gone. And maybe that's the truest symbol of America's new era, the death of the middle. The place where compromise lived, where negotiation happened, where belief in shared reality once anchored the republic. That center has collapsed, and in its place stand two new visions, one algorithmic, one populist, each convinced it alone represents the will of the people. So where does this end? With reform? With renewal? Or with something darker, a future where democracy becomes performance art, and power belongs to whoever tells the most convincing story? No one knows. But one thing is certain: Mamdani's revelation and Trump's retaliation didn't just change a campaign. They revealed what America had already become, a nation at war with itself, not over policy, but over perception. And the scariest part? The war isn't coming. It's already here, waged not with weapons, but with words. So here we are, staring at a nation that looks familiar on the surface but feels completely different underneath. What began as a local election in New York has turned into a mirror reflecting the entire country's fracture. Mamdani thought he was building a movement to restore democracy. Trump turned it into proof that democracy was already lost. And somewhere between those two forces, one driven by algorithms, the other by anger, America changed. This isn't just politics anymore. It's psychology. A battle for attention, for meaning, for control over what is real. The institutions that once anchored truth, the press, the courts, even Congress itself, have become backdrops in someone else's show. Everyone's talking, but no one's listening. Everyone's awake, but half the nation is dreaming a different dream. That's the new war, the war of perception. No bombs, no soldiers, no borders, just stories. Whoever tells the most powerful story wins. Mamdani's vision was one kind of story, a digital democracy reborn from the ground up. Trump's response was another, the righteous rebellion of a forgotten people reclaiming what's theirs. And caught between those narratives is the rest of America, tired, divided, uncertain which truth to believe. But maybe that's where the real danger lies. Because once a society starts agreeing on reality, it stops being a society. Once facts become flexible, power becomes permanent. And those who understand that, the Schumers, the Mamdanis, the Trumps of the world, will use it until the system itself breaks. So what now? Maybe the answer isn't in choosing a side, but in learning to see the manipulation that both sides depend on. Maybe the real revolution begins when people stop reacting to fear and start asking better questions. Because fear is the oldest form of control, and right now, it's the only thing both parties truly share. If you've stayed with me through this story, if you've watched the lies, the leaks, the unraveling, don't just walk away from it. Leave a comment. Tell me what you see happening in this country. Do you believe democracy can survive the war of perception? And if you believe, like I do, that truth still matters, that light still cuts through darkness, even in times like this, then like this video, share it, and subscribe so more people can hear the truth before the noise drowns it out. Because in the end, silence isn't peace. Silence is surrender. And this, right here, right now, is not the moment to be silent.